I am an unbeliever. I don't observe Jewish customs except as a souvenir of family ties. But to a Gentile, I am a Jew. There isn't a Gentile anywhere who at one moment or another hasn't thought, Jew.
Hello, I'm Patrick Pacheco. Welcome to this episode of Theater All the Moving Parts about Leopoldstadt, Tom Stoppart's epic drama about a Jewish family in Vienna, tragically caught up in the vise of history. 3 of the 38-member cast join us to speak about the challenges of bringing the play to life. Then we have a discussion of Tom Stoppart's prodigious legacy after nearly 60 years as a playwright. First, let's meet the actors, Faye Castello, Brandon Uranowitz, and Artie Fruchon. Welcome, Faye, Brandon, and Artie, and congratulations on 3 beautiful performances in a magnificent play. I think we should probably start by saying that obviously Leopoldstadt follows 2 Jewish families of Vienna from 1899 to 1955 through the horrors of 2 world wars. Running through the play is the idea of assimilation because there's a lot of intermarriage between the Jews and the Gentiles within the play. Let me just start by asking you, what were your impressions when you read the play? And as you read the play, was there any particular line that unlocked your respective character for you? And I know you played dual roles and you play dual roles, but we'll start obviously with your first role as Ludwig and yours as Fritz. But let's start with you, Gretel. Faye as Gretel.
I think my very first reading was bafflement and not really knowing what on earth was going on.
A typical Stadtardian.
How long is this opening act going on for? Which one's that?
And we should say that Gretel obviously is a Gentile.
She is.
Married to Hermann, who has converted to Catholicism, although born Jewish.
Yes.
And part of the Merz family.
Yeah, and he has converted to Catholicism long before he met Gretel. That's a choice that he made.
That's interesting.
On his own. It wasn't to have a marriage. They met after that.
I see. And what struck you about Gretel?
I always refer to Gretel as a hedonist. I was very drawn to her. She's a hedonist of the highest order, and I mean it as kind of the most lateral sense. She is a lover of life, and she's curious and excited by new things. She's not afraid of things, and she wants to ask questions and be present, and I think she loves people.
One of the striking things about her, of course, is that she is more Jewish than other Jews, particularly her husband himself. She even lectures her husband at one point when Nathan is getting a bris about what circumcision means to the Jews. What makes her more Jewish than her Jewish relative in-laws?
I think that comes to her over decades. I think it's her notion of family. And you know, Gretel isn't she hasn't been afforded the most erudite arguments in the play, but everybody, I think, has a sense of what's happening to society and what's happening to Europe around us. And Gretel's sense of investing time and energy into learning about the Jewish faith is a way of holding on to her family, is a way of holding on to her nearest and dearest and having a sense of belonging whilst the world around her and the society that she was born into and ultimately belongs to is fragmenting.
Brandon, as Ludwig, obviously, you are the brother-in-law of her husband, of Gretel's husband. He takes consolation in mathematics.
Of course. Mathematics is the only language in which you can make yourself clear, I find.
And his friendship with Dr. Freud. Why is that?
I think it's his way of finding order within chaos. I mean, I think numbers are a very clear and specific way of keeping things organized and orderly in a chaotic world. And I mean, the thing that really struck me about him and that struck me about the play, because when I first read it, I had a very similar experience to
Bafflement.
a lot of people, just bafflement. And I mean, but a really important confusion, I think, because there's a lot of history within the play that I didn't really know, the specifics of which I didn't know. I have Eastern European relatives, survivors within my family, and I sort of only know their very specific experiences, and I didn't know all of the history, and so this became sort of a history lesson for me. But the thing that really struck me the most, you asked about a specific line. Ludwig says there's a pretty incredible argument between Hermann and Ludwig at the top about assimilation, and that's a question that I think particularly a lot of American Jews have been asking for decades. It's a really complicated, nuanced issue, I think, for the Jewish community in this country, what it means to be assimilated, and is assimilation a worthy endeavor, and is it an endeavor that can lead to complete and holistic success? And he says assimilation doesn't mean to stop being a Jew. Assimilation means to carry on being a Jew without insult.
Assimilation means to carry on being a Jew without insult. Episcopalians are assimilated. Zoroastrians are assimilated. I could be a Druid for all my professors care. It is only the Jews. I am an unbeliever. I don't observe Jewish customs except as a souvenir of family ties. But to a Gentile, I am a Jew. There isn't a Gentile anywhere who at one moment or another hasn't thought, Jew.
And that is what really struck me. And then by the time you get to the end, you sort of have the wind knocked out of you. But it's also all very cerebral up until that point. But for Ludwig, it's very much about finding order. In a world that is very unclear, specifically for the Jews.
And how did that argument about assimilation affect your own personal feelings about being an assimilated Jew?
It cracked me open in a really interesting way. I've had a very complicated relationship with my own Jewishness. I grew up going to temple on the High Holy Days. I went to Hebrew school. I got bar mitzvahed. I did sort of what is expected of. I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, so tri-state area Jews. I did what was expected, but I never went really any further than that. I think because of the privilege that is afforded to Jews of a certain status, class, in this country. And it's really gotten me back in touch with who I am and what I stand for and what's important to me and my own identity. There are questions that I haven't really had to ask myself. Mm-hmm. I've benefited from a lot of privilege within my career and my life. And I think that there's a false sense of security within that. And this play sort of shatters that false sense of security. The line now, I mean, I still love that line about assimilation meaning to continue on without insult. But the thing that really sticks with me now, particularly at this sort of watershed moment in our country, is Nellie has a line in 1924 where she says, fascism is only a step away.
There's no flag anymore for the ground where we stood. We liberal bourgeois Jews. It's the red flag or the standard of the old guard with fascism only a step away. Not even a step. Mussolini's frontier takes in what was Austrian territory only 6 years ago. Never trust a leader who likes dressing up.
And then we go right into 38, but that's 14 years of unraveling. Mm-hmm. And we're sort of at that, I feel like we're at that moment right now in 1924. And there's a falseness there, I think.
And Nellie is, in relation to you, is
Ludwig's daughter.
Ludwig's daughter. Got it. Good keep that family tree.
Yeah. That was another
going.
thing. When I read the play, I had to keep the family tree I had to print it out and put it next to me.
Essential companion.
and refer to it every page.
Yeah, your idea of false sense of security runs throughout the play in a very frightening manner. Artie, are you Jewish? Were you raised
No,
in a
my
Jewish family?
father is from Iran.
From Iran.
But I grew up in London with many, many close Jewish friends and family friends. So have been to my fair share of Rosh Hashanah dinners and Seder's, you know. So I had sort of cultural insight into that from a young age. But no, my father is from a Middle Eastern background. My mother is basically English.
And you play Fritz, obviously, in the first part of the play.
Yes.
And Fritz is something of a villain. Obviously, he has an affair
He's
with
everything of a villain.
Gretel, and he's an anti-Semite and a soldier as well.
Yeah.
How did you manage, working probably with Patrick Marber, the director, not to make him a villain, to make him sort of...
I think what the angle that I decided was most interesting for him would be one of sort of personal resentment and injury. And in that he has an affair with Gretel, and Gretel decides to leave him for her husband. And Fritz, who has fallen for this very dazzling and very, I don't know, incredibly, she's very elevated in society. I think he really falls for her in a genuine way. And the sense of personal injury in her leaving him for this man who he believes is subhuman, because of his obviously disgusting but very much real set of beliefs that were quite common amongst, he has a manifesto about Jews being essentially not worthy of human rights, basically, in the play. So I think making it about how personal injury and resentment and offense can turn into bigotry, and
Which is what Brandon was just talking about, is going on in culture
totally
in American
So racism being a
society
scapegoat
right now.
for other things that are kind of completely unrelated. And I think I tried to make it personal with Fritz's field, the jealousy of a man who has been emasculated.
Speaking of personal, this is Tom Stoppard's most personal play, obviously. When he was in his 50s, in the early 90s, he discovers that his family is Jewish and had perished. Immediate relatives, his mother's sisters, had perished in the camps. You obviously play his stand-in, alter ego to some extent, Nathan, who is confronted with that.
Leo, yeah.
Leo, excuse me, sorry.
No, but Nathan
Yes,
is the one
Leonard,
who helps him
sorry,
confront that.
yes,
Yeah,
that's right. Excuse
Am I
me.
right?
By the way, Leo, what is it with Leonard? Your name was Leopold? Too Jewish?
Go and boil your head, Nathan. I'm sorry you had a rotten war.
A rotten war?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about your mother and father.
Obviously, you are his alter ego, his stand-in as Leo. Leonard, who's Leonard Chamberlain, but Letty discovers that he's actually Leonard Fishbein. But he's been acculturated in London through the years, because his mother is very frightened about what might happen to him, because she knows just what a price he can pay.
Yeah. She, I think she has a sobering realization towards the end of 1938, where actually, she's at a fork in the road, and she realizes that, this is a crucial point. And a lot of the rest of the family don't make that. They don't think it's worth it. They don't think that, they have a sort of, I hesitate to say naive faith, but an optimism in that things won't get worse. And I think Nellie, sees the gravity and, the protectiveness of a mother, and is desperate to, because Leo's father, my character's father, biological father, is killed, in Austria. So I think, it's for a sense of survival and protection of her.
And then Nellie marries Percy,
Nellie marries
Chamberlain,
Percy,
who raises you, and you're allowed to escape, obviously, to England, leaving the family behind. Faye, did you meet Tom Stoppard? Did you have conversations with Tom Stoppard? And what was your impression of him particularly since this is a play about his family.
We've been blessed at every iteration of this show to have Tom. Tom's very present in the room. And when we originally rehearsed this play, he was with us every day, all day. So it becomes totally normal to have Tom Stoppard in the room with you. And you just sort of go and get him a coffee and see if he's okay. He is an extraordinary person, but we all know he's an extraordinary person. So without sounding trite, but he is now a man of some experience and age, and he is just still as sharp as a tack. So when you can't connect a thought, or you're stumbling over a line because you haven't made the connection, when you have the oracle there and you go like, what does it mean? What does it mean?
Did you ask him anything specifically about Gretel and what he may have meant by some of the lines he
I didn't
wrote about
specifically. I don't think. I felt so utterly supported by Tom, and he totally championed me to do Gretel, so I owe him a great deal of thanks.
When you listen to Ludwig, you certainly hear Tom Stoppard.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have a lot of conversations with him about where Ludwig was coming from?
Faye's had many years experience with Tom, and Artie's had a couple too. I've only had several weeks, so I'm still sort of trying to crack through the reverence and the overwhelm.
Yeah, I'm still working.
But also, the wonderful thing about Tom is his writing is, if you really give it its due, if you give it the energy that it deserves, it's all there. I mean, all of the dots connect. And so, because I'm still overwhelmed and, sort of worshiping at the altar of Tom Stoppard, I have been sort of withholding with asking too many questions, because I think I can put in the effort and the energy to figure it out because he's done all the work for us. There have been things that he has offered me when it may appear that I'm like struggling, small little things that I might be misreading or misinterpreting. He's been just the loveliest, warmest, most supportive presence.
To what extent was Ludwig impressed with Freud? And what is the role of Freud in the play in terms of the fact that he is obviously a Jewish a revolutionary, really, and the idea of dream analysis and everything else that
I think
comes up in your character?
For Ludwig, it's just another scientific mystery that's being given clarity and articulation. I mean, I think for Ludwig, there is a curiosity about the mysteries of the mind that is utterly fascinating to him. It's again like, trying to figure out a proof for a mathematical function or something. There's something that he sees represented or reflected back at him within Freud, who is solving problems that are both scientific and sort of ethereal and intangible. That he is. I think he thinks of him sort of as a peer on some level.
One of the things that Ludwig does throughout the play is play with the cat's cradle. And there is a scene in the middle of the play between Ludwig and his nephew.
His nephew and his grandson. Young Leo is his grandson, and then Nathan, who I then play, is his nephew.
But, as it happens, we do know, like God, that everything unfolded from our game of cat's cradle. Each state came out of the previous one. So there is order underneath. Mathematical order.
There's something prophetic about Ludwig in 1899 that then is sort of validated in this cat's cradle. I mean, it's just showing that there's order underneath all of it. That there is a way of saying that A leads to B leads to C, and this is how we got here. And that's sort of the brilliance of the play, that Tom shows you how you get from A to Z within 2 hours, even though it takes over 60 years.
And Artie, in terms of looking to the past in your own family, having been in this play, and I'm sure that it starts with an album, a photo album, in which one is led to believe that these are pictures of the family and people wanting to know about that. How has it brought you closer to the preceding generations of your own family?
I have a very interesting relationship with my heritage in that I was born in the US, but I grew up in London, and my father, in a sort of Stoppardian way, embraced his adoptive country of the UK so wholly that he wasn't interested in passing on his Iranian culture or the Persian language to me. And so I had this sort of cultural black hole, in my life that I've only latterly started to explore. And Leo's story of unmasking this whole network of connections to a family and a culture that he has completely repressed and forgotten about is incredibly poignant and resonates really with me and is a journey that I am on in my personal life of bringing myself closer and understanding what it means to be connected to a very different culture to the one that I grew up in.
Faye, how's this play impacted the way that you look at preceding generations of your family and their sort of role in their respective society?
I don't share in a legacy or an ancestry that has involved major upheaval and travel and catastrophe and tragedy. I wouldn't dare say a sort of jealousy, but there hasn't been a reckoning in my family. My dad's mother once thought she had traced our family tree back to the Spanish Armada. And
After a couple of glasses of sherry.
my aunt, her daughter, spoke to an actual genealogist who said she had never encountered a family who had travelled so little in their life.
Wow.
We've never left Yorkshire. Can't do it. But which is so funny to me.
When you look at it, you mentioned the word envy or jealousy, or is it because you're looking at a family that has been bound together by these historical events in a way that perhaps your family could never be?
I think so. We're bound together in different ways, aren't we? I am extremely fortunate to have a fairly numerous family of people who get on extremely well. And I've actually been blessed with grandparents who have had really long lives and great aunts and uncles and things. So I have an extraordinary connection to age in my family has been very present. Generations have been very close to each other, and celebrations, commiserations have been shared in the same way. And I think for any of us, as we all get older and we start saying goodbye to people that have actually felt very present in our lives, it's a reckoning of any kind.
Brandon, throughout the play, there are people that commit suicide. There are people that, in terms of what is happening, in terms of the historical thing, Nathan obviously survives. And in that survival, what is the weight of history on him?
He's just shattered. He's sort of like just an open wound. And I think there's what's so beautiful about that last scene when you finally, you go from the opening of the play with just like dozens of people on stage to just 3. There's an immense amount of guilt, survivor's guilt. There's resentment for being saved when so many have died, which is a line, but there's something really beautiful about him needing this family and finding hope within what is left and what has survived. I think Rosa and Leo at the end represent that small little glimmer of hope that I think was he has been completely stripped of. I mean, the thing about playing Ludwig and Nathan that I love so much is that Ludwig is very prescient and I think a bit prophetic at the top. However, there is hope there. And Nathan is very much like Ludwig, just without hope. And then in getting to know Leo, in the finding this family, there's the hope is sort of alive.
It's rekindled.
It's rekindled.
It's rekindled in Nathan by this experience.
Yeah.
We should say that Rosa is there as well.
Yeah.
Who is an aunt to you, right? Which is basically what sort of happened to Stoppard. In that explosively emotional moment in the last act of the play, Leo is kind of unaware of everything when he walks into that scene, into that room, and slowly but surely things come back to him.
Yeah.
The cat's cradle, and more particularly, you say to him, there's a scar on your hand. You look at that scar, and memories come crowding back. What is happening to Leo in that rush of emotion as he pieces this all together?
It's really hard to articulate because that's the kind of the subconscious, or the memory that has been made into subconscious by years of repression and is kind of bursting to the surface. And it's almost like it sounds slightly sort of like I'm underplaying it by saying this, but it's sort of a Proustian moment in this, something triggers and it can be something quite mundane. And this has happened to me in my life, a smell or a flavor or a certain sight, suddenly unlocks a whole kind of wardrobe of memory and emotion. And that is happening in the most intense and kind of cataclysmic way in that moment for Leo. I think, his whole identity kind of reveals itself to him. And I think guilt is flooding in as well, and I think that's what Tom is writing and what propelled him to write the play in lots of ways. I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I think he's mentioned about how he feels like he's atoning for his obliviousness or partially willful ignorance at times, I guess. And so Leo is feeling this huge rush of guilt and responsibility, and as well as memory and a sort of eureka moment.
We have to wrap up, but before we do, obviously there's the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. And if you were all at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem and could write a prayer and put it in the wall, what would it be? Let's start with you, Artie.
Gosh.
Or we can start with whomever wants to. Brandon, you want to take this?
Sure. I mean, it would just be some iteration of Never Again, I think. I think this play is sort of a clarion call to stopping repeating histories in its tracks. And we're sort of in the thick of it right now. And my prayer would just be that we take the lessons that we've learned, look to history, look to our past, look to this play, and stop it in its tracks.
Artie?
I totally agree with what Brandon says, and I think that's as worthwhile a prayer as any. I mean, I think just, to be kind to each other and to learn from each other. It's kind of, it's as simple as that, I think, for me.
Faye?
I think mine would, obviously, that would be the headline, but that we just listen to each other a little bit more, that we are more open and more able and more willing to listen to people that might not on the surface seem like ourselves, when truly we are.
Well, I would encourage everyone that may be watching to listen to the words of Tom Stoppard as interpreted by the three of you in three brilliant performances. Thank you so much for being with us, and congratulations on a wonderful performance, and also the best of luck for a long run.
Thank
you. Thank you for having us.
And thank you. We are taking a short break. When we return, we will delve into the splendid legacy of Tom Stoppard with director Jack O'Brien and theater historian and professor James Armstrong. Welcome back. After writing more than 36 dramas, including Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, The Real Thing, and The Coast of Utopia, Tom Stoppard has said that Leopoldstadt may well be his last play. Discussing the significance are veteran director Jack O'Brien, a frequent Stoppard collaborator, who has a new memoir, Jack in the Box, and James Armstrong, who teaches at City College and Brew College and also has a new book, Romantic Actors, Romantic Dramas. Welcome, James, and welcome, Jack, speaking to us from Salt Lake City, Utah, where you are knee-deep in rehearsals for Shucked, the Broadway-bound musical that was one time known as the Hee Haw Musical or Moonshine. I know it's reinvented, but Jack, I can't think of anything more remote from Tom Stoppard than Shucked. You are a protean director indeed.
I'm a lucky guy, but it's so much fun to be on that end of the spectrum after being on Tom's.
Jack, I know that you met Tom in 1988, then worked with him on Hapgood in 1994. Now, he learned of his Jewish roots in the early 90s. Did he ever speak to you about it?
He told me this extraordinary story that he had been attending a PEN meeting in Europe. It was being hosted by his very dear friend, Václav Havel. And it was at a roadhouse. They were having this affair. And he didn't realize this, but the rule is you do not leave the party until the president leaves the party. And Havel was having a wonderful time, and they were having a few drinks. And so the party broke up at like 3 a.m. And Tom drove back to the hotel where he was staying. He was on his way to bed. And the man at the desk said, "Excuse me, Sir Tom, that young man sitting over there has been there since afternoon. He wants a word with you." And Tom thought, "Oh, Jesus, I'm so tired. All I want to do is go to bed." The young man came up and he was carrying a huge sheaf of photographs. They hardly spoke the same language. They sat down and the young man, who turned out to be his cousin, pointed to a person in a photograph Tom had never seen, and it was Tom's mother. And that was the first concrete proof he had that there were family connections in this Jewish tradition.
And then, of course, it led to Leopoldstadt. And Václav Havel, we should say, was the president of Czechoslovakia shortly after the wall fell. And Stoppard, of course, wrote about that very movingly in Rock and Roll, from the spring, the Czech spring of 1968 all the way to Václav Havel becoming president. It's an extraordinary span of history that he incorporates in so many different plays. James, what was your opinion of Leopoldstadt, and what do you suppose is most important to convey to your students about it?
One of the things that struck me about it was that it does have this very personal connection to Stoppard and his own family. And one of the things I like to get my students to think about is, well, what about your family? What are their stories? If you were to tell your family story in a fictionalized way, because of course it's not actually Tom Stoppard's family, it's all fictionalized, but if you were to tell that story to the world, how would you tell the story of your own family?
Jack, your next play, I believe after Hapgood, was The Invention of Love, about A.E. Housman, his life as an Oxford undergraduate, and his obsession with a beautiful young man, Moses Jackson, I believe. In the play, E.E. Housman, the poet, says, "How will I make my mark in the world?" I'm paraphrasing, of course. What will be my monument? What do you think Tom Stoppard's monument will be?
Well, he's singular, isn't he? I mean, there hasn't been a voice like his, maybe ever. There's this monumental intelligence. There's this real sense of not only humor, but of humanity about him. And he gently nibbles, gently cannibalizes his life and his experiences as he reveals the subjects that move him. They're wide-ranging. He's an autodidact, you know. He didn't go to university.
Right, yeah.
And so when you realize we all feel so stupid around him, and you can't not, but he's very generous about it. I compare him to a gentle pachyderm, not wanting to tread on an ant when you're, you know. But he was so patient with me, teaching me quantum physics originally for Hapgood, and then going into all of this Oxford tradition. Actually, I was over visiting him years later, and he drove me to Oxford to show me all the places that he dramatized. It was so moving.
You mentioned that Invention of Love may represent your best work. Why?
Well, first of all, in the theater, the best work is a collaboration. So, I mean, Tom has done his work, but then we all have to breathe life into it. And so that brings a community of actors and technicians and designers and advisors and dramaturgs and all sorts of things. People bringing their own expertise to the table to make the illusion happen in front of you in the audience that it's actually going on. So with the Houseman play, so rich in a tradition that I have no experience in at all, I had the incredible help of, as a partner, as the designer Bob Crowley, who was a kind of poet, really. He did all the hard problem we did together. So formed an unholy alliance. And he got me into Tom's mind, so that rather than being literal, we tried very much to illuminate Tom's exquisite text. And that's why I think we achieved it, maybe for that play, better than any of the others, in my estimation.
James, what do you think, which play do you think is Stoppard's best play? The one that we'll be talking about 50 years from now.
Oh, that is a good question, because so often he is responding to something very specific. I'm thinking, for instance, the play Jumpers, which was responding to something very, very specific in British politics at the time that we've all forgotten. And yet you can watch Jumpers today and totally enjoy it. And I think looking at a play like Leopoldstadt, it's definitely responding to very specific things. And yet, unfortunately, it's become so incredibly timely today with Kanye West tweeting out this anti-Semitic garbage, and we've even got, elected officials talking about Jewish space lasers and all sorts of ridiculous things that's being echoed in the play that's talking about a very, very different time. And one of my favorite plays by Tom Stoppard is Travesties, which is about this very specific historical anecdote when James Joyce and Tristan Tzara and Vladimir Lenin were all together, and he spins this magnificent fantasy out of it. And so,
including the importance of being earnest.
Yes, because Joyce was involved in a lawsuit over the price of a pair of trousers for a amateur production of The Importance of Being Earnest. And the thing is, I have talked to people who have seen Travesties without having seen or read The Importance of Being Earnest, which is surprising to me as a Wilde fan, but they still enjoy it. I've known people who have read or seen productions of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead before they ever encountered Hamlet, and they still enjoy it.
That's just part of, as Jack was saying, the mind of Tom Stoppard. And if you look at something, Jack, like Hapgood, which is about quantum physics, two different sets of identical twins, and the threat of international espionage, it's very densely plotted, as you well know, and had to tackle. Stoppard himself has said that sometimes he wrote, and he said this specifically of Hapgood, it's too complicated and too dense for its own good. Why didn't Stoppard simplify it for the sake of us ants and idiots?
It's such fun talking about this with you, the two of you, because I'm listening as a director to hear what your opinions are. And of course, the truth of the matter is he's a supreme dramatist. What it's also true is that he's a magpie. He picks up every bit of glitter, of intellectual charm, of what occasion, circumstance. That's all fodder. That's all grist for his mill. But the remarkable thing is he cobbles together a world, a universe of his own. And we sit in the audience, and that's our way in to his point of view. More than anything, he's a supreme dramatist. I just want to throw out the name Arcadia while you're talking about the great plays. That's the one I wish to God one day I have enough energy to do. I love that play. But you fall in love with them for Stoppardian reasons, not for reasons of eclecticity.
The interesting thing that you've mentioned, Jack, and what critics often say, and what's often written about him, is that he is cerebral. But what you injected, I think that perhaps other directors have ignored, is sex, a certain eroticism into his plays that I don't think anybody else seems to get a handle on. Would you say that his plays are erotic?
In the abstract, Tom Stoppard is one of the most compellingly seductive, fascinating human beings I've ever known. And to be blunt, it's catnip to women because he's so self-effacing. And the combination of that kind of, I don't know, glamour that Mick Jagger, they were friends, of course. So it makes great sense that you have this highly intellectualized man with a taste for everything who's close to rock stars. So yes, indeed, you cannot not realize that he's a highly passionate and I suppose sexual being. He's had many wonderful affairs. He's been married several times. Now with the glorious Sabrina Geddes, they're married. We all feel, everyone feels it. We finally got it right. He got the right woman at the right time. But there's always been some fabulous woman involved. And that's part of his appeal, I think.
Yeah, he included, obviously, one of the characters in rock and roll is Syd Barrett of Pink Floyd. That was part of his rock and roll background. When he arrived in 1966 with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, he was like a rock star. How do your students, James, consider him? Do they think that he's very dense? Do they get him? Is he accessible to your students? He certainly seemed to us like a rock star.
Definitely Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead is very accessible for them because it is so funny, and it is playing with all of these ideas that they may have encountered in Shakespeare or that they may have encountered in Beckett, because of course there's so much of Waiting for Godot that is in part of that whole milieu of the play, but they're getting it in a way that they can understand a lot more easily. I don't know if it is simply because he, at the time that he wrote that play, was more similar to them than either Beckett or Shakespeare ever was when they were writing their great plays. But there is something that's immediately accessible about that play, and really about all of his plays. And yet, even without knowing the source material that he's drawing from, he makes it eminently entertaining. And even when discussing something like quantum physics, he discusses it in a way that somebody who doesn't have a background in quantum physics can understand what he's talking about.
Until your production of Hapgood, Jack, I could not make heads or tails of Hapgood. I really couldn't. Which brings me to the idea of him and writing for women. Stockard Channing obviously played the character of Mother. in Hapgood, who kind of is in charge of figuring out who may be stealing these secrets. And one
His
of
name,
his
in fact, is Hapgood.
yes, and then one of the strongest female characters that he's ever written was Annie in The Real Thing. How does Stoppard approach writing about women and for women actors?
It's an interesting question. I've never asked him, but you're quite right. Of a mind that is highly literate and disposed to analyze, these women's roles pop out as dimensional, as fascinating individuals of their own. So I think the answer, again, I keep coming back to it, is Tom's intense curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
He's so curious, and he wants to share that with you.
Mm-hmm.
His discussions, I mean, he's so patient. And when you talk about these things, and you say, as I've done on many occasions, Tom, I don't get it. I don't know what you're saying here. And then his gorgeous answer to me is, well, then I haven't written it right.
Wow, that's very self-effacing and modest for a playwright.
And he would go back and rewrite sections that, sadly for me, were longer than what I wanted to cut. It was also better. And I had to admit, oh, I see. He's turning it over in his mind, but it's all about communication. It's all about the glory and the specificity of language.
Mm-hmm. Which is a point that you made, James. And communication and entertainment. I think if you ask anybody, Tony Kushner, any playwright that has the reputation of being cerebral, entertaining an audience is primary. Would you say that's true for Stoppard?
He's hilarious. He writes funny stuff. I mean, we have to mention something like The Real Inspector Hound, which is just a hilariously funny play. In all of it, I did remember there were some great laughs in The Coast of Utopia, the trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
There are big laughs in The Hard Problem. You always get guffaws in a Stoppardian play. So yes, it is cerebral. Yes, it is intellectual, but it's vastly entertaining. He's an entertainer.
Speaking of Coast of Utopia and speaking of length, 9 hours, 3 plays. Jack, for which you won the Tony Award, and the play, of course, also won the Tony Award. What is it about Revolutionaries? Because obviously you mentioned earlier
Travesties.
Travesties, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Travesties, which is set in 1917, and Lenin is part of that. Coast of Utopia was sort of pre-revolutionary Russia, about intellectuals coming together to form the thoughts that would presumably lead to the Russian Revolution. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. What was it about revolution that attracts Tom Stoppard?
I think action, don't you? Rebels, people who shake things up, who challenge, they're active people. And the theater is a platform, basically not necessarily just for reflection, but for action. We go to see a play happen. By the way, years ago, in the last century, people used to describe it as going to hear a play.
Mm-hmm.
And now we go to see a play because we're dazzled by the technical advances that have been made. But Tom likes energy. He's fascinated. He's extraordinarily energetic himself at his age. Yeah, I think he's a year older than I am now. But the energy is formidable.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's attracted to subjects that are explosive.
Where would you locate Stoppard's moral compass? Is he an optimist? Is he a pessimist? Is he a cynic? Is he a romantic?
Yes.
All of the above?
I'm sorry. I mean, it's to know him, to have worked with him, to care for him as I do, to dissect him seems to be folly. He's got to be one of the most remarkable human beings I've ever encountered, but he's my friend. And so if there's a moral compass there, it's his own. He doesn't trumpet it. He's even-handed. He wants to be fair. And to his characters and to the plays, he wants them to have a kind of substantial truth. And that is a moral position. He doesn't put targets up on the wall to destroy. He shares.
A great humanist in that regard. James, you mentioned earlier, obviously, we live in a very morally ambiguous time. What is it as an ethical playwright, if we can even describe him as such, you want your students to take away from his work?
Well, Stoppard has been quoted as saying, and I don't know if he ever actually said this, that he became a playwright because it was one of the few ways in which one could contradict oneself and not be sent to a mental institution. When you're a playwright, you get to write all of these different points of view. And the best moments in his plays are when we're seeing two people with very different contradictory points of view having a heated discussion, and we are not sure who is right. And I think that particularly today, particularly in the United States and the political environment that we're in now, we need to have an appreciation for the ability to disagree and the ability to live in a state of a certain amount of moral ambiguity where we are going to respect one another even when we take positions that are vastly different from one another.
That's amazing because it kind of reminds me of a playwright that you mentioned earlier, which was Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think that Stoppard would come out of the tradition of Wilde, maybe more so the angry young men of the 1950s. But really, he's very rich in that tradition. We have to wrap up, Jack, but before we do, Stoppard had said that this may well be his last play. He's backed off of that. Do you think that Leopoldstadt is his last play? Do you hope that's not true?
I hope not. I hope not. Actors act, directors direct, writers write. As long as you have the donkey stick in front of you, you plod on. And that gives you an opportunity to experience time or the glorious luck of lasting. Tom and I have both made it into our 80s. I don't know about you guys. I never thought I'd live this old. I didn't. And yet I'm leaving right now to go to rehearsal for a brand new musical. And I think to myself, how did this happen? It's Tom's, oh God, it's Tom's battery pack. No. It's too late. He's a playwright. And so he ingests and he creates. And as long as that mind is working, he's going to put pen to pencil and to paper and make something out of it.
After 35 years nearly of knowing him, what is the one word that you would say he has taught you?
Humility.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
He's a very humble man. He pushes the compliments away. Mm-hmm. He makes it possible. He's interested in you. Mm-hmm. How about that?
James, what is the one thing that you would most want your students to take away from Stoppard's work?
To laugh. Mm-hmm. Because as you said before everything else, he's an entertainer. And if you can't come away from Stoppard being entertained, there's probably something wrong.
Well, that's a very good note to end on. Thank you both for participating. Jack, the only thing I need to ask you is, how did you stand the smoke? If you've ever interviewed Stoppard or been with him, it's one cigarette after another. I hope he stopped for his own health.
I don't think he has. I mean, Sabrina, his wife now, she was very early in their marriage, very disciplinarian and monitoring his cigarettes. Now she's smoking too.
The guy is infectious. What can I tell you? Anyway.
He was created to break rules, let's face it.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff. Break a leg on Chuck. Congratulations again on your wonderful new book, Jack in the Box, and have a great time with your company. And James, thank you for joining us. Congratulations on your book. And I'm sure that you'll have lots to tell your students when you meet them in a couple of hours.
I'm sure I will.
Thank you both.
You bet.
And thank you for joining us. We look forward to bringing you more fascinating conversations with artists and thought leaders as New York Theater The Fabulous Invalid regains its invaluable place in American culture. I'm Patrick Pacheco.